Welcome to the Flightcast, a place where opinions aren't right or wrong, and where we can agree or disagree about movies, TV, and other assorted media because it's all subjective. My name is Ray. Thank you so much for joining me. It is a weird time. Not weird in a bad sense, weird in a good sense, sort of. This particular episode of the Flightcast is the first one post the release of all of the 2025 comic book movies. Can you believe we're done? Like, there are no more new releases. Now, there's plenty to go out and see. Superman's going to be in theaters for a good little bit, according to James Gunn. And as far as the box office returns are concerned, yes, for sure. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit later on in the show. And also Fantastic Four First Steps. That just opened, so that's got some runs still left in it. So it's not like there aren't comic book movies to go and watch, but this is it. Right? All four of the major comic book movie releases for this year, 3 for Marvel, 1 for DC, are out. They have released, right? And, you know, maybe some of you had the Thunderbolts 4K Steelbook pre-ordered. Maybe it arrived today like mine did. So once again, my library of Marvel Cinematic Universe Steelbooks is complete. I now have all 36 that have been released, and the pre-order for Fantastic Four First Steps has not been put out there yet. Once it is, that will get pre-ordered. I will have that for sure. But, you know, I'm a completionist. I do have them all. But, yeah, this is a weird time. I mean, it's not like there's a shortage of things to talk about, because there's plenty to talk about from San Diego Comic-Con, you know, not necessarily with Marvel and DC. A few things from Marvel and DC. Like just a few, smattering, if you will. But definitely some stuff from my favorite franchise of all time, Star Trek. Definitely some news to talk about with respect to that franchise. And then, like I mentioned before, we'll talk a little bit of box office, a little bit more chatter about Superman and Fantastic Four and this new landscape that we're navigating, not just in terms of fandom, but in terms of box office in general, because I feel like a lot of people, they're regurgitating all the old arguments, at least all the rage baits and the trolls and the monkeys in the pocket universe typing away for Lex Luthor. They are chattering away with all the old regurgitated nonsense, and it is time to recalibrate our expectations. It's time to recalibrate our thoughts with respect to Hollywood box office going forward. We'll talk about that and a number of other things later on in this show. But of course, before diving headfirst into everything for this week, I want to remind everybody listening to this show that you can listen to this show and the other shows in the Flightcast Podcast Network at theflightcast.com or wherever you get your podcasts, whether that is Apple Podcasts, whether it is the Flightcast YouTube page, youtube.com/theflightcast will take you to all of the podcast episodes launched there on that page. They all go up new as soon as they are posted on the website. You can also listen to the Flightcast on Spotify and Pandora as well, or wherever you get your podcast. There's this show that comes out on Tuesdays. This Thursday is going to be a Flightbox episode because I am going to get caught up on Star Trek Strange New Worlds. There will be 4 episodes available by that time because the 4th episode is going to release on Thursday. I am going to get caught up. I'm going to binge. I'm going to watch the first 4 episodes of this 3rd season of Star Trek Strange New Worlds, which you would have thought I'd have been more in a hurry. Timing just hasn't worked out for me. We've been waiting 2 years for this particular season to drop, and now that it is here, I've watched none of it. Well, we're going to change that, and I'm going to talk about that, which means that my other plan for Flightbox is going to end up going to Patreon. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second here, but we'll have Flightbox on Thursday, and Thursday will be a catch-all day, you know, mostly television if I can squeeze it in, but, you know, other things, you know, other shows, that'll be a day that I reserve for other recordings, you know, whatever that's going to be. And then the weekend, we're going to go back to Flight Chat. Last weekend was Flight Review for Fantastic Four. We're going to go back to Flight Chat because not really, I mean, I know Naked Gun is coming out this week, but I'm not, I'm in a wait-and-see mode with respect to that particular film. But we got some feedback to cover, because I know a lot of you have sent emails, and a number of you are sending more emails with respect to Fantastic Four, and also some chatter about Superman in the box office. I think Anthony Dorsey may be sending an email missive perhaps this week. We'll see where that goes. But yeah, we're going to have a lot of feedback to cover, so stay tuned for that on Flight Chat this upcoming weekend. That'll be a doozy. Probably another 4.5 hour long episode, depending on how long everybody's emails are with respect to feedback. But stay tuned for that. Also want to take a moment to thank everybody that is a supporter of patreon.com/theflightcast. Thank you to any of you who have newly signed up to be a flight officer and get access to all the bonus content. I posted another episode of Flight Speed yesterday, ranting a little bit about San Diego Comic-Con and certainly about the box office success with the opening weekends for both Superman and Fantastic Four First Steps, and, just some not safe for work chatter, if you will, on what this new landscape means for the box office, especially for comic book movies going forward. So that was posted there. What I mentioned earlier, my original plan for Flightbox is, I haven't seen Creature Commandos. Creature Commandos is a DC Universe series that I have not watched. I did not watch it before seeing Superman. Well, I need to. I need to binge it. I need to watch it. And, Scott and I, unfortunately, we did not get a chance to talk about it on DC TV Squadcast before we all decided to shutter the doors on that. So I will talk about it. I will watch it. I will watch those 7 episodes. They're 29 minutes or less a piece. I'll find a day, pick a couple of hours to binge through all of that and give my thoughts on it on Flightbox, a special Flightbox episode on Patreon. And in addition to that, I will hopefully finally get to reviewing my big project. I got a big project that's part of my library, if you will, my collecting efforts for physical media that I want to get to, that I want to review. And some of you may be very interested to hear what animated franchise I am indeed going to dive headfirst into. It might be a surprise. It might be something that you didn't know that I was interested in that regard. I have talked about Pixar before. No, it is not Pixar. I have reviewed a couple of Pixar movies before, and I have more to review because there's still about 8 or 9 Pixar movies that I have not watched, including Inside Out, Finding Dory, and a number of others as well. But there's a big animated franchise that I want to dive into and do some flight review episodes exclusively for Patreon for that. So stay tuned for that. Thank you so much for supporting patreon.com/theflightcast, and hope that you're enjoying all the bonus content that is there. And stay tuned for more bonus content for flight officers as well as flight crew indeed. All right, let's get into it. San Diego Comic-Con snuck up on me. Seriously. Because of how July has been, loaded with movies, I completely forgot that it was happening. And I know we talked about it. I know it was something that, months ago we were like, okay, yeah, it's the same weekend as Fantastic Four. I realized that, but I got to be honest with you. This whole month I've had Superman on the brain. I saw that 3 times and then was preparing to see Fantastic Four First Steps for that first opening weekend, and I did. And, I talked with the guys on Vodka Stream about it again. I was on there again last week, and you know what? It wasn't until, I think we talked to William from Sci-Fi Center. I was like, who was at San Diego Comic-Con last weekend, was like, oh yeah, that's right. That is this weekend. It was just a different scenario. And, it wasn't a ton that necessarily, was announced. I mean, there were other there were other things, plenty of projects and whatnot announced. But there was no presence from Marvel because they skipped Hall H, understandably so, because it's opening weekend for Fantastic Four. Why would Feige and company be teasing anything new when want you to go to the theater to see Fantastic Four, right? So nothing from Hall H, as far as Marvel is concerned. And then DC's presentation, I mean, they were there, James Gunn and the DCU crew, the DC Studios crew was there, but they were there to promote Peacemaker Season 2. And, it was one of those cases where, other information, other news, the Regurgitators were working on overdrive, right? Talking, there was that one clip that he did. It was this funny clip. It was meant to be a funny clip, right? 2 minutes long, with him and this other podcaster, YouTuber, this dude named Straw Hat Goofy, or at least that's what he goes by, Straw Hat Goofy. And he's gotten a lot of, crazy great interviews with Ryan Coogler and a number of other creators, and he talked to James Gunn, right? And the idea is they're supposed to be talking about the DC Studios slate while John Cena is standing off to the left in full Peacemaker garb. And basically the idea is that they're going through the list of projects and he's waiting for them to say Peacemaker Season 2, and that's, when he's going to go nuts, right? It's the classic comedy gag of, hey, person expecting to be recognized and then they're completely passed over and forgotten, right? And then they get upset at the end, which he did when they went through the whole list. He said F you, and then he stormed off, and then of course they ended the clip with John Cena talking about Peacemaker Season 2, which is going to premiere on HBO Max on August 21st, right? So, it was supposed to be a funny gag like that, but what happened was, as James Gunn is listing off all of these projects, right? He's talking about Batman Brave and the Bold, Wonder Woman, Supergirl, Clayface, right? Lanterns. He's talking about all this stuff, and even before you can get to the punchline with the Peacemaker Season 2 deal, he mentions, Straw Hat Goofy brings up the Authority, and that's when James Gunn is like, the Authority, he didn't say the Authority was canceled. He didn't say the Authority was shelved, right? And we already, Horowitz, he already talked about this in the Happy, Sad, Confused podcast earlier when he finished the Superman press tour about how the Authority was essentially on hold, right? Like, that's the most that we can infer from James Gunn's reaction. But of course, the regurgitators, Culture Crave, discussing film, they get a fandom wire, they get a hold of it, and it's like, the Authority has been canceled, the director has moved on. And it's like, okay, let's go ahead and all jump to conclusions like we normally do. Look, here's the thing. James Gunn being the creative boss of DC Studios, I feel like unless he says it's canceled, it's just on hold. And you can take him at his word for that because he's the one that's the architect of this plan. But he's also a creative, and he's also intent on this idea of all the DCU movies not feeling like homework, right? So the idea is that they share a world, but the connective tissue isn't going to be, in theory, it's not going to be through storylines. It's not going to be through major stuff that is like connected. You're like, well, stay tuned for the next movie because here's what's going to happen in the next chapter of that deal, right? So in that respect, it's not like the Authority has to be done like at this point in time, right? Maybe it was part of his original plan to have it done, in between Supergirl and Clayface, or maybe right after Clayface or whatever, but he is holding all the keys with respect to the creative, juices of this particular franchise. And he can move these projects around as he so chooses, right? Wonder Woman has a screenwriter, and, Anna Nagara was already attached to a Teen Titans script, the Supergirl script, which of course is in the can, right? That's in post-production. And now this Wonder Woman script. And it's to the point where he even reaffirmed that there is no Teen Titans script, right? Like, Teen Titans was announced first before, that she was attached to that first, before the Wonder Woman news came out last week. And now it's like, no, that's the higher priority. She's writing Wonder Woman right now. Teen Titans is just there, right? Teen Titans has still been announced. Teen Titans is still going to be written by her. They still like her writing, but they're leaving it there, right? And that's the same thing with the Authority. Whether a writer has been assigned to it or not, whether a director has been assigned to it or not, it's just floating there in the ether until James Gunn says it's not. So until I hear him say the words, the Authority is canceled, which he might say, he could say that at any point in time, but until he says that, it's not canceled. Regardless of what anybody on any lazy narratives, any lazy takes anybody on social media wants to attach to that. But that's what was gleaned out of the DCU stuff. That and, the tidbits about Peacemaker Season 2, people trying to figure out exactly what it is about Peacemaker Season 1 that is still canon, and of course we as fans, we take canon far too seriously. And I mean, is it really that difficult to just only focus on what's in Season 2 and what they reference as far as what is canon in the DCU? And is it really that difficult for us to accept that the one thing that James Gunn has officially said is that the biggest thing, whether you watch his podcast with him, his wife Jennifer Holland, and John Economos, right, or Steve Agee, rather, who plays Economos in Peacemaker and, of course, the Suicide Squad, whether you watch their show or not, to glean knowledge in terms of what is canon from Season 1 and what isn't. The biggest thing that he has told us already, that we already knew, is that the Justice League isn't canon. No, it's not Aquaman, not Jason Momoa's Aquaman, not Ezra Miller's Flash, not Gal Gadot's Wonder Woman, and not, Henry Cavill's Superman, not Ben Affleck's Batman, not Ray Fisher's Cyborg. No, that's over. The DCEU is over. That has ended. Any direct DCEU, connections from that universe are gone. And I don't see why that's not difficult for us. It's not that I don't see why. I see why fans want to be difficult about it. It's not difficult for us. It's not difficult for us to simply move forward and say, well, this is different. It's not going to be this Justice League. I mean, Superman's already changed, right? That's something within the canon that, we can reason and we can logistically spell out here, is that Superman is already different. Superman is no longer Henry Cavill, right? So if Superman is different, then it would stand to reason that Batman, Wonder Woman, and the rest of the Justice League would be different as far as DCU proper, right? So whatever. We stress out too much over that, and we love to harp on it as a fan base. We love to talk about, well, how come we can't make this clear, and how come this can't be made clear? And it's like, give it a rest, guys. No, I know, I get it. You're not going to give it a rest because, we've got to argue, and we've got to nitpick, and we've got to, demand perfection about certain things. I mean, it's not that difficult. I mean, we can fill in our own damn blanks with respect to that. And we all know the inside baseball. That's the other thing that kind of frustrates me with that assumption, is we all know what happened. We all know good and damn well that James Gunn did the Suicide Squad and Peacemaker Season 1 before he was the head of DC Studios. When he became the head of DC Studios, he was tasked with putting together a brand new plan, and he's changing things. And does that mean that he's allowed to bring over characters and whatnot that he brought into the DCEU? Yeah, it does. It does mean that. And if you want to be pissy about it, and I'm not necessarily talking specifically to anybody here, but maybe if I am referring to you, and you want to be upset about it, and you want to be bothered by that, that is your business. It's all subjective. But he is in charge. He has been given the keys to the kingdom. He is the one running the show creatively. Peter Safran is backing him up as a producer financially, and he gets to do this. Whether you like it or not, he gets to do this, right? If you don't like it, that is your business. But me, I'm in favor of anything that helps DC succeed cinematically and on the small screen. And I am very intrigued, I'm very interested, I'm very invested as a DC fan in the future of the DCU and the future of DC Studios. So I'm really not going to harp on James Gunn deciding to bring his wife and John Cena and all of his characters from the Suicide Squad, a movie that I do enjoy, right? I consider the Suicide Squad to be one of the better DCEU films, okay? And anybody that he wants to bring over from that film, like, he can do that. Like, as far as I'm concerned, I'm perfectly okay with that. He's already done it with Peacemaker, and the whole thing about him killing Rick Flag has clearly crossed over. Does it happen a little differently? Probably at this point, but the fact of the matter is he can do whatever he wants. He can. And I don't really see the big issue with it. Like, if you want to let that stick in your craw and you know, make a big deal out of it, again, that's your business. I don't care. It is what it is. So, you know, the whole canonical stuff, I'm just looking forward to what Season 2 brings and what else we can do to flesh out this world and what type of story they're going to tell in Season 2, especially with that new trailer showing off all these different multiverses and, you know, different universes, the different universe that he's going to be hiding in and living in and, like, all that stuff. Like, I'm more intrigued to see how the DCU gets fleshed out with its next iteration, with its next installment. It's another reason why I want to watch Creature Commandos and hurry up and review that on Patreon, because I want to get caught up in terms of the progression, the world building of this universe. It started, you know, with a soft launch of Creature Commandos. It's now been officially, you know, the grand opening with Superman is there, right? We know what Metropolis and Superman is like. And so now we're going to find out, you know, how Peacemaker and everybody fits into it. And of course, Peacemaker was in Superman, right? So, like, we're past that moratorium, by the way. Remember the Russo brothers, like, 2 weekends moratorium? We're 3 weekends deep into Superman. I feel like just about everybody that has listened to this show or listens to this show on the regular has seen the movie at least once, and if not, what I just said wasn't a massive spoiler. It's a brief appearance, if you will. Again, part of the world building to keep everything loosey-goosey and not necessarily tie it into a particular storyline in the DCU. I hope it works. We'll see how it goes. But yeah, that was it, really, with respect to DC news. Nothing else big on the horizon, just people kind of grasping at anything they could with respect to DC news at San Diego Comic-Con. So that means that it was time for my favorite franchise of all time to take center stage with respect to San Diego Comic-Con announcements, and that, of course, is Star Trek. Oh, my beloved Star Trek. Yes, they had a lot to announce this past weekend. Let's start with the big news with respect to Star Trek Strange New Worlds, right? Season 4 just wrapped filming, and they presented a teaser for an episode of Season 4 that I cannot tell you how giddy and childlike with excitement I am for this, because it's an image, it's a video of Anson Mount's Captain Christopher Pike in Muppet form. And I say Muppet form even though they keep saying puppet, because here's the deal. They have told us that it's the Jim Henson Workshop that has made these puppets for them. You know what that means? It means they're Muppets, right? In fact, you know what? Let me Google this. I was talking about this on Patreon the other day. The difference between a Muppet and a puppet. Okay, here we go. I Googled it, and here's the Wikipedia article, right? This is literally from the Muppets Wikipedia article, from the beginnings section, if you will, of the history. It says, the Muppets were created by puppeteer Jim Henson in the 1950s. Henson claimed that he coined the term Muppet as a portmanteau of the words marionette and puppet. Among Henson's earliest creations was Kermit the Frog, who became his most recognizable character. Yes, marionette and puppet. That is what makes it different, right? Because puppets, they don't have the arms, they don't have the wires, like the different controls, right? When you watch the behind the scenes stuff, when you saw like Jim Henson and Frank Oz and all the other puppeteers controlling Muppets, you could see that there's a lot more involved with respect to controlling a Muppet, right? And not just in terms of the controls, but also in terms of the design, right? Like, these are not puppets, okay? This is not Captain Christopher Pike puppet. This is Captain Christopher Pike Muppet, okay? My crew of the Starship Enterprise is being Muppetized for an episode. Yes, yes, yes. I am excited. This is awesome. This is not jumping the shark. You know why? Because go down the history of Star Trek episodes. Pick a series. I don't care what series it is. Pick a Star Trek series. And some crazy shit has happened. I mean, come on. The original series, crazy shit happened. Look, there's an episode of Star Trek, the original series, in which they find a haunted house on an abandoned planet that is being inhabited by two superficial beings, one of whom can turn into a large black cat that chases the crew down the hallways of this castle with a dungeon. Okay? It was a Halloween episode. It's called Catspaw. It's in the second season. That's the tip of the iceberg of crazy shit that happened on the original series. Don't get me started on TNG. Okay? Anybody that's watched TNG, you know the crazy shit that happened. You know the crazy random shit. Need I remind you that Dr. Beverly Crusher had sex with a ghost in a season 7 episode? Oh, you heard me right. Dr. Beverly Crusher screwed a ghost in season 7 of Star Trek The Next Generation. Weird shit has happened in TNG. Okay? Weird shit's happened in DS9. Weird shit's happened in Voyager. Weird shit has happened all over the Star Trek franchise. So don't give me any crap about them being turned into Muppets for this episode of Star Trek Strange New Worlds. It's all part of the same craziness. They can become animated, they can become Muppets, they can do whatever, okay? It's awesome. I can't wait, because obviously I love Muppets. Obviously I grew up with The Muppet Show and Kermit the Frog and Sesame Street and all that and whatnot. And to see my favorite franchise of all time in Muppet form, yes, 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 yes. And that's season 4, mind you. There's still season 3. Right? We're almost 4 episodes into season 3 after a 2-year hiatus. So I still need to get caught up on that. I have so much Star Trek to enjoy. So it was really like all this stuff coming out at San Diego Comic-Con is just a massive bonus. Like, we've got so much to actually look forward to, even though Strange New Worlds is ending. And they talked a lot about, Paul Wesley and his evolution as Captain Kirk. And, how Akiva Goldsman has said that they're going to get this show in that final season. They're going to get it as close to the original series, right? They're going to lead us into Kirk's 5-year mission that is largely chronicled in the original series. And they've also said, Akiva Goldsman has also said that he wants fans and whatnot to chime in, because all those sets are still there, right? The Enterprise and all the other sets that they've got for Strange New Worlds, all the characters are there, right? We've got 4 of the 7 senior staff, right? We've got 4 of them already. We've got Spock, we've got Kirk, we've got Uhura, we've got Scotty now, right? And we're going to see like a whole season of Scotty aboard the Enterprise, right? Like, it's only a matter of time before he transitions himself into chief engineer of that ship over this season and into season 4, and certainly into the 5th and final season, whenever that airs, whenever that releases on Paramount Plus, right? So, we've still got some time here, right? We still got Sulu and Chekhov and McCoy are waiting in the wings. And you know what? They don't necessarily have to be there, right? Because, McCoy was not in Where No Man Has Gone Before. And I don't remember if Sulu was in it or not either, but he may not have been. But Sulu was in the Man Trap, right? So, it doesn't even have to be that. And Chekhov didn't pop up on the Enterprise, at least not in terms of, on screen, until season 2. It was understood, I guess, the headcanon is that he was aboard the ship in season 1, right? Because otherwise Khan wouldn't have remembered him in Wrath of Khan, right? But I never forget a face, Mr. Chekhov, isn't it? I never thought to see your face again. Speaking of Khan, here's a great segue. How about this podcast that they're talking about, right? With respect to the Star Trek Khan show, right? What is this going on here? The Star Trek Khan audio series, which will feature George Takei as Sulu and Tim Russ as Tuvok. There was a teaser released for that. And this is going to be a production that has already wrapped. Lost actor Naveen Andrews is voicing Khan for the audio series that originally started as a TV miniseries that was written by Nicholas Meyer, who, of course, was the writer-director of Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan. And he is like Star Trek royalty, seriously. He directed two of the best Star Trek movies out there, Star Trek II, Wrath of Khan, and, of course, Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country, which I think to this day I still believe, subjectively speaking, might be the best Star Trek movie ever made, in my humble opinion. But they had a new teaser for this scripted audio series, which will debut on Star Trek Day, September 8th this year. New episodes will be available weekly on Mondays through November 3rd, wherever you get your podcast, it says. It also includes Ren Schmidt from For All Mankind as Lieutenant Marla McGivers, Sonia Cassidy from Reacher as Dr. Rosalind Lear. Supporting voice cast includes Ali Haskevy from Oppenheimer as Delmonda, Maury Sterling from Homeland as Ivan, Mercy Malik from Mr. Mayer as Ursula, and Zuri Washington from Life with Althar as Maddow. It's based on a story that Nicholas Meyer wrote, which, if I'm not mistaken, is going to be like part of the SETI Alpha 5 situation, right? If Marla's involved, right? It's got to be everything that happened on SETI Alpha 5, like before Wrath of Khan occurred. But it's also going to be like a window into the past, right? Because if it's Captain Sulu, then that means captain of the USS Excelsior, which is why the Tuvok is going to be there, because, of course, Tuvok served aboard that ship, we learned, during Voyager, right? So Tuvok is going to be there, and that also means that, it's going to be like this look back, because at that point, right, Star Trek 6 timeline, Khan will have been dead for well over a decade, because, the events of Wrath of Khan will certainly have preceded themselves in that regard. So it'll be like a flashback, right? But of course, there's nothing more wibbly wobbly, timey wimey than Star Trek other than Doctor Who, right? That might be the only thing that's more wibbly wobbly, timey wimey than Star Trek is Doctor Who. But definitely as far as time continuum stuff, no, this is going to be intriguing. I'm not one for audio shows and audiobooks, but this is one that I think I may actually give a listen seriously and try to check out and see how it is, because since it's being officially released, you figure it's got to be canonical, right? This, whatever happens in this audio series is going to be canonical with the rest of the franchise, with the prime timeline, if you will, right? It's not going to be an offshoot. It's not going to be like pocketbooks in that regard, especially if they're producing it, if Paramount is producing it, if Nick Meyer is the one that wrote this. So yeah, that's definitely going to be an intriguing thing to hear, and an intriguing part of the story. Very interesting to see where they go with that. So there was that announcement as well. And then beyond all of that, the big thing that was definitely announced, we got the first trailer for Star Trek Starfleet Academy, and it looks good. It looks good. Holly Hunter, who is playing the captain of the training ship in this particular series, she was at Comic-Con, talking about her being in the role, and talked about how her husband, I guess, was more initiated into it and was getting more excited necessarily than she was initially when she was, offered the part. And so she decided to take the role and has just launched into it. This is a brand new cast of characters, brand new people. But we do have a familiar face in Robert Picardo returning as the holographic Doctor. I will be very curious to know how they explain his age, if they do, in fact, explain his age. They don't have to. They really don't have to. Or maybe they will. We'll see how it goes. But him returning, Robert Picardo returning to the Star Trek franchise after 7 fantastic seasons on Star Trek Voyager as one of the best characters on that show, in my opinion. One of my favorite characters for sure. Yeah, it's welcome. It's great to welcome him back into the franchise, but also to see some new faces. What I like about this is, this is a continuation of Star Trek Discovery, right? So for all of the butthurt, fake Trekkies, the nerd MAGA Trekkies that, are just complained about Discovery and have complained about the Paramount Plus era of new Trek, if you will, right? Yeah, well, you can kiss our collective asses, because they're continuing on with this new show that is spinning off from Star Trek Discovery, the one that you hated so much, right? But we continue on, and this is in 32nd century, so this is the future. This is the rebuilding of Starfleet Command, right? This is the rebuilding of Starfleet Academy, from whence it was resurrected by Michael Burnham, Captain Michael Burnham, and the crew of the USS Discovery, right? So this is continuing that legacy forward. So we've got a whole new cast and crew. We've got whole new officers that are training, right? We've got Paul Giamatti playing what looks to be a very intriguing Star Trek villain, and of course, why not Paul Giamatti? You have such a vast career, you've got so many storied roles, you've got like such a wide berth. Why not play a damn Star Trek villain? Of course, play a Star Trek villain, Paul Giamatti. Yes, hell yes, right? If Rainn Wilson and Amanda Plummer and the like can become Star Trek villains in the Paramount Plus universe, then you can do the same. If Tamlin Tomita can do that, you can do the same. Absolutely, yes. Looking forward to Paul Giamatti's Star Trek villainy. He's going to eat it up. I know he is, because that's what he does. But one of the things that I really do like about the 32nd century Star Trek stuff, the Discovery era, if you will, is the evolution 900 some odd years in the future of everything that we've come to know, right? And that's where I get to talk about Gina Yasharay's character, because as soon as I saw this picture and this description, I got really excited. She is playing a Starfleet Academy instructor that is half Klingon, half Jem'Hadar. That is fantastic. And she looks phenomenal. I love her design, right? As soon as I saw it, like, it's one of those where, like, when you've been a fan of this for over 30 years, like, without even knowing, without even reading the description, I said, that is Klingon and Jem'Hadar. That is so good. You know, we had you had the president Riliak, the president of the Federation in season 4, half Bajoran, half Cardassian, which is unspeakable in the DS9 era. Absolutely, like, how on earth could that possibly ever even be considered in the, in the DS9 era? Like as far as, like, being publicly acceptable, and yet the president of the Federation in the 32nd century, half Bajoran, half Cardassian, right? So that was awesome, right? Like seeing, like, like evolved Ferengi and how they've changed, like seeing how the Trill have evolved, and right, and then seeing this. What a crazy idea! What an idea that when you think about it, it's like, okay, Klingons and Jem'Hadar. Yeah, the Jem'Hadar had to go somewhere, right? They weren't just going to destroy all of them after the war ended, right? The Jem'Hadar were going to remain, and so that's a case where, like, them and the Klingons, yeah, I could see that. I mean, there are many similarities, if you will, in terms of, like, their code of honor and, like, how they treat war. Victory is life, and it is a good day today is a good day to die, right? So that just makes sense, right? And the idea that she is playing this hybrid that is a Starfleet Academy instructor, like, yes. I love this, seeing the evolution of where Star Trek can go, even from the reality that we know, even from where we're at. Like, I loved seeing that evolution, in Star Trek Discovery for seasons 3 through 5, and I love seeing it continued here in this particular show. And of course, there were so many Easter eggs. I mean, we saw, they named a lounge or like a section of the Academy after Kirk, right? We saw somebody reading about Captain Benjamin Sisko, the emissary of the prophets, and what happened to him. What do you believe happened to him? That type of thing. Like, there was so much stuff going on with respect to, like, the lore and the history of Star Trek, and I can't wait to see how they pay homage to that, because they most certainly are, right? And I've said this from the beginning, for all of the gatekeepers, for all of the butthurt nerd MAGA morons that want to trash the Paramount Plus Star Trek shows. Listen, take it from somebody who's been a fan of this franchise since he was 9 years old. Alex Kurtzman and the people in charge of Star Trek at Paramount Plus, they know what the hell they're doing. They know their lore, they know their history, they know the core and the inner guts of this franchise, and they're doing a phenomenal job respecting all of that history. They are, as far as I'm concerned. And if you want to be butthurt about it, if you want to be, a jerk about it, that is entirely your business. But I will continue to be happier than you and enjoy this new show. I will enjoy the final 3 seasons of Strange New Worlds. I will enjoy whatever else this franchise gives us, right? I'll enjoy Star Trek Con, the audio series. I am enjoying the Paramount Plus Star Trek stuff. I most certainly am. I have all of Star Trek Discovery in glorious Blu-ray. I have all of Star Trek Lower Decks in glorious Steelbook Blu-ray, okay? Like, I have all of Star Trek Picard, okay? Like, I am a massive fan of this franchise. It is my favorite franchise of all time, and it is exciting, and for once, it did kind of get a chance to take center stage at San Diego Comic-Con as far as announcements, right? Because they had the most new to announce out of the franchises that I personally follow, right? The ones that I really, like, am heavily invested in and talk about on this show. And so, yeah, I am in favor of it. I'm a big fan of it, truthfully, and I can't wait to see what they have cooking, and I hope, that all this other business stuff going on with Paramount doesn't affect the franchise too much. I know obviously it will, within a number of ways, right? But I am excited for the future of Star Trek. There's a lot to be excited for, and yeah, cannot wait. They had a great presentation, lots of great stuff. Again, Star Trek Day is on September 8th, so with Star Trek Con, there'll be other announcements and whatnot, other news more than likely that will pop up. They've done that. There are 2 days, and I love that Star Trek does this. There are 2 days that they pop up with information and new stuff, and that they treat as like the holidays for them, like the official announcement days for them. There's April 5th, which is First Contact Day for those who watch Star Trek First Contact. You understand that? And then there's September 8th, which is the anniversary. That's the actual anniversary. That is the first date, September 8th, 1966, was the first airing of The Man Trap, the very first episode of Star Trek, the original series that aired. Not the first produced, not the first in the chronological order, but the first aired episode of Star Trek ever. The Man Trap on September 8th, 1966. So that is Star Trek Day, right? We've got First Contact Day and Star Trek Day. I love that they have 2 days, 2 holidays with respect to that. So yeah, can't wait. Excited. Gonna be awesome. All right, let's dive back into the comic book movies because we are not done with either Superman or Fantastic Four First Steps by a damn sight. We got some numbers to talk about. We have some trolls and some morons and some monkeys in the pocket dimension to piss off right now. Let me start by saying this. Superman and Fantastic Four First Steps have both enjoyed very similar, successful opening weekends. That is the truth, right? That is certainly a form of objective fact. Now, I would love to be able to refer to the numbers.com, but once again, that website is having issues. I don't know what their problem is. The other day, it wouldn't work at all. Like, it just would not launch and, had some type of exception error, and I've been trying to log onto it for, the last 5 minutes, and nothing doing. And the problem with this, of course, is that Box Office Mojo does not update their numbers very quickly whatsoever, right? So I can't 100% trust that what they have listed here for Fantastic Four First Steps or Superman is 100% accurate. Now, I think this is relatively accurate. I'm going to cross-reference it with Kitesh Panda. Kitesh Panda, of course, is somebody that I've been following for a number of years. He's the founder and editor of BoxOfficeGuru.com. I've been following him since the early Twitter days, and his information is pretty accurate, right? He's not a fly-by-night person. He's somebody that whose information you can take to the bank. He's a better, more well-rounded version of Jeff Bach at Exhibitor Relations. I don't like Jeff Bach at all because he's anti-DC, and he posts snark for attention. He's an attention whore. Gitesh Panda does not do that, as far as I'm concerned. As far as his posts on Twitter, which I don't see, but he's on Blue Sky, thankfully, so I was able to follow him again, because has some very valuable information, and puts things into perspective. For example, he first came out, he posts, on the day, every day, a couple times a day, with updated numbers. And when he first started looking at the box office between Superman and Fantastic Four, he noted that Fantastic Four rather had a higher opening turnout, as far as the front loaded the preview showings, right? I think it was 24 million for the preview showings for Fantastic Four as opposed to 22 million in that regard, right? And then it went into opening weekend numbers, and as it turns out, the opening weekend numbers, that's where it's not much of a disparity, right? You can look at this and you can say, well, Superman had a bigger opening weekend, 220 million global, 125 domestic, 125 million domestic, 95 million worldwide, 220 total, right? Fantastic Four had a 218 million global opening, so that's 118 million as far as domestic. It turned out to be a little bit lower than that. It was reported, it's 117 million and some change, but we'll go ahead and round that up to 118 million, and then 100 million international. Now, the trolls and the people looking for pissing contests will look at that and go, oh, well, clearly it's doing better internationally, yet at $5 million. Wow, $5 million better internationally. Okay, you go ahead and tip your cap to that. And then, of course, the other side will go, well, Superman clearly dominated on the domestics. No, they didn't. They made $7 million more domestically. The fact of the matter is these movies had very similar opening weekends, whether Fantastic Four was front-loaded or not, which he did say it was on Friday because apparently the Saturday drop was more than he was expecting, more than the industry was expecting. But either way, 220 versus 218. These movies had damn near identical opening weekends. And from that, we can discern this as far as box office going forward, at least for now, with respect to the month of July in 2025. Domestic outweighs international. And I'm telling you guys right now, with respect to box office, that's something that you're going to want to pay attention to. That's something that we're going to keep in the back of your mind, right? Because we're not used to that. Remember, we've talked about how domestic being more than international has been the exception instead of the rule, especially with comic book films. And now we're seeing back-to-back comic book movies. And not only just back-to-back comic book movies, but two different labels, right? One DC, one Marvel. Remember, the general audience doesn't give a shit, but we certainly do, and the industry definitely discerns them in that regard, right? Two different labels, right? You got the DC Universe starting off fresh with a brand new Superman movie as movie one in its cinematic universe. You got the Fantastic Four First Steps, even though it is a standalone film that isn't connected to 616, it's Earth 828. Still, it is the 37th film in the Marvel Cinematic Universe since May of 2008, right? Two franchises in very different positions with very different objectives, both needing the success for very different reasons. And they both come out of it succeeding more in the United States than they do internationally, right? Fantastic Four did not open well in China, just like Superman didn't open well in China. Both films opened lesser in the UK than they thought they were, right? A $5 million difference in terms of international monies in that regard, right? So all this talk about how Fantastic Four was going to gobble up and spit out Superman as soon as it released didn't happen. Didn't happen at all. In fact, not only did that not happen, right? Not only did they finish very close to each other in terms of opening weekends, but how about this? With $3 million earned last night on Monday, right? I'm recording this episode on a Tuesday. With $3 million more earned on Monday night, Superman, James Gunn's 2025 Superman film, has now officially passed Man of Steel as the highest grossing domestic Superman movie, right? $292.5 million Superman has grossed domestically through this past Monday, as opposed to $291 million for Man of Steel. And no, I don't give a shit about inflation. And here's why. Okay, because number one, these official numbers they don't account for inflation, right? Like, all the people that want to, and when it gets into the pissing contest and the nonsense, right? Because you want to save face for Man of Steel. You think that somehow this is a slight on Man of Steel. No, it is not. It is not a slight on Man of Steel. And here's why people are pathetic for thinking that it is. The reality of the situation is that Man of Steel came out 12 years ago. It's part of the DCEU. It was the first film in the DCEU. It started off that franchise. And it was made and released at a very different time. 2013 was a very different time, right? We're coming off of Avengers making $1.5 billion. We're coming off of Christopher Nolan hitting $1 billion on back-to-back DC films, back-to-back Batman films, no less. Okay, The Dark Knight in 2008 and The Dark Knight Rises in 2012, right? We were at the cusp of record-breaking cinema numbers on a regular basis, and it was just the beginning in terms of what Marvel was going to start doing with billion-dollar earners for the next decade or whatnot, right? It was a very, very different landscape in terms of money, in terms of Hollywood, in terms of where the world sat, right? And then 2020 happened. 2020 did happen, guys, okay? That was 5 years ago, but it did occur, and it did decimate this industry. It most certainly laid waste to Hollywood and threw everything for a loop. There are theaters that have shuttered their doors permanently as a result of 2020, did not recover from what the pandemic did to them. And the same goes for us as the general audience, like, at large, right? Like, they're still recovering. There's still economic challenges and there's still social challenges, right? Think about inflation with respect to current cost of living, right? I've talked about this. My biggest thing about superhero fatigue, and Kevin Feige says Superman proves that it wasn't, that there never was superhero fatigue. Yeah, you're right, Kevin. You even said it yourself. I talked about it last week on Flightcast about how you put out too many movies. You put out too much content. You oversaturated the market. That was the real superhero fatigue. Now look what's happened, right? We got back-to-back Marvel and DC movies in July that are critically acclaimed by both the critics and the audience on the Hell site and everywhere else on social media as well, right? Like, and I wonder what the difference is, right? You distance yourselves from Thunderbolts, you distance yourselves from Brave New World a little bit. You put it out at the end of July, right? So it's 2 full months, right? And even though I like Thunderbolts, even though it did get critically acclaimed, right? I wondered if the audience, general audience, was waiting for Fantastic Four to see an MCU film, and so far it looks like that's precisely what they have done. And we will see exactly where it finishes, but my odds are it's going to finish. If Superman has now reached, in 17 days and 18 days, it reached 292 million domestic, and well over 500 million, I think up to 506 million globally in that regard. Then it stands to reason that Fantastic Four, with similar word of mouth, similar A- cinema score, could do the exact same for the Marvel Cinematic Universe within the next 2.5 weeks, right? But we got trolls and we got people out here looking at this like, oh, well, is it really succeeding? I mean, those numbers are so low compared to before. Yeah, no shit, Sherlock, because the pandemic happened in 2020 and Hollywood is still recovering from that. And guess what? They're also still recovering from the bitch-ass strikes last year. And I call them bitch-ass because they were unnecessary and the studio owners got what they deserved with respect to the losses that they're still trying to figure out. And the problem is, of course, that, shit rolls downhill. And, the powers that be in the studio heads are going to pass on the nonsense to us with respect to whatever cuts and whatever mergers. And, this thing happening now where, it not just the Paramount merger, but also this Warner Brothers Discovery split that got reported a couple of days ago, actually yesterday, I think was when this story broke. Warner Brothers Discovery, I'm reading this from Deadline. Joe Goldsmith put this out. Talk about this for a little bit here. Warner Brothers Discovery has unveiled key details of its upcoming separation with top leadership and the names of its 2 new companies. Teams are both comprised of current executives with many in similar roles, although some titles have been tweaked. Streaming and Studios, which will be home to Warner Brothers Television, Warner Brothers Motion Picture Group, DC Studios, HBO, HBO Max, and Warner Brothers Gaming Studios and the film and television libraries, will simply be called Warner Brothers, honoring the legacy of more than a century of industry-defining storytelling, according to WBD. Global networks, including CNN, TNT Sports in the U.S., Discovery, and free-to-air channels across Europe, the Discovery Plus streaming service, and Bleacher Report will be called Discovery Global. So there you have it. That is the split that is happening. We got Warner Brothers, which has all the stuff that we necessarily care about with respect to DC Studios and the HBO Max stuff and whatnot. And then Global Networks, which if you're a fan of, TNT Sports, hockey and basketball, tennis and all that stuff. I think they have tennis, if I'm not mistaken. But and any of the Discovery Channel stuff, that's going to be Discovery Global. All right. Fair enough, right? David Zaslav will hold the same title as the new Warner Brothers WBD CFO. Gunnar Wiedenfels will be CEO of Discovery Global. All right, so Zaslav will still be in charge of Warner Brothers when Wiedenfels will be the CEO of Discovery Global in that regard. David Levy, who exited as chief operating officer of CNN Worldwide, may return to parent Warner Brothers Discovery in an unspecified role, was not named. Either way. The rest of the executive structure, we already know. We already know about Pam Abdy and Mike DeLuca being co-chairs and CEOs of Warner Brothers Motion Picture Group, which DC Studios is not a part of, because that is co-chaired by James Gunn and Peter Safran separately. I will never get tired of saying that. Casey Bloy is a name that we haven't heard in a while. He's still chairman and CEO of HBO and Max Content. He will become chairman of CEO, HBO, and HBO Max. All right, so we already know what's there. There's plenty of other names, that we may or may not know going down for that. But this is all, again, restructuring, right? All these studios, all these companies are restructuring it, and they're still trying to pick up the pieces. They're still trying to mitigate the damage that they inflicted upon themselves last year with those stupid-ass strikes. Trying to wait out the writers and trying to wait out the actors, right? So they're still hemorrhaging stuff. And, of course, like I said, it rolls downhill and it affects everybody, on the lower end. But this is what I'm talking about in terms of the landscape being different. And as I get back to talking about box office here, this is why we need to reframe our expectations on what box office is, guys. Seriously, there was a piece that I read a couple of days ago, right? And I'll cite this as well because this is important to note. Last week, George Salai, a writer that I am not familiar with, put up this piece from the Hollywood Reporter about box office grosses and what the experts are saying as far as what to expect going forward. And it says, U.S. and global box office and total cinema revenue will not reach pre-COVID-19 pandemic levels by 2029, according to accounting firm PwC's annual Closely Watched Media and Entertainment Outlook report released late on July 23rd. In the U.S., pre-pandemic total cinema revenue is not forecast to be reached by 2029, despite a compound annual growth rate of 3.9%. PwC had recorded nearly $11.7 billion in U.S. total cinema revenue in the pre-pandemic year 2019, after $11.8 billion in 2018. The firm projects the figure to rise from $8.9 billion in 2024 and $9.6 billion in 2025 to $10.1 billion in 2026, $10.3 billion in 2027, $10.6 billion in 2028, and finally $10.8 billion in 2029. Asked by The Hollywood Reporter about how pre-COVID box office levels are not expected to be reached by 2029, Bart Spiegel, the PwC Global Entertainment and Media Leader, says, quote, "Unfortunately, this full recovery is unlikely within the forecast period. However, we project that by the end of 2029, the industry will be on the brink of a full rebound. In other words, 2030 may be the year global box office revenues return to pre-pandemic levels." Okay? Do we understand what they're saying here, guys? Right? This is what I'm talking about in terms of mitigating your expectations. Once again, pre-COVID, U.S. box office in 2018 amounted to $10.8 billion before a 2019 drop to $10.7 billion. The 2024 figure forecasted by PwC, $8.1 billion, would grow to $8.7 billion this year. So we're already like $2 billion less than what the 2019 amount was, right? That's a $2 billion drop, okay? So when you're looking at it, when you're talking about your expectations for Superman, your expectations for Fantastic Four First Steps, $1 billion or more was never on the table, right? Because this is how the industry itself has changed. Never mind people's previous thoughts about the Fantastic Four movies, never mind people's previous thoughts about DC as a brand, right? All these fan narratives about brand damage and people don't trust Fantastic Four movies, people don't trust Superman, people don't trust DC. Never mind all that shit. That's all noise. That's all fan noise. That's all ridiculous. The general audience does not give a shit about any of that. What they do give a shit about is their disposable income, and they were spending a hell of a lot more of it in 2019 than they are now. They were spending $2 billion more in 2019, the year before the pandemic. We're $2 billion behind 6 years ago, okay? And 6 years ago in 2019, Captain Marvel made $1 billion. Avengers Endgame made nearly $3 billion, right? Remember those numbers, right? Remember what we were talking about? Remember how Marvel could do no wrong? That was back before it started getting rotten reviews and back before the humbling that I and many of us were looking forward to for Marvel fans. It did happen. Oh, it's happened. It most certainly has happened, right? But now we're at this point where we've all got to refocus our expectations. We've all got to level set here. The industry has not recovered from 2020, and that is a far bigger factor than any perceived brand damage that you think DC has to deal with or that you think Superman has to deal with. Certainly anything that any troll believes Zack Snyder might have done. No, has nothing to do with that, because of course all those numbers pre-COVID Zack Snyder was a part of. Remember that? Remember the $3 billion I keep telling everybody that the first 4 movies of the DCEU made? That's all part of pre-COVID numbers, right? We still need to get back to that. We still need to get back to that level. We're $2 billion behind that level, and these guys are saying we're not going to get there for another 4 years, at least. Probably 5. 2030 is when they think we're going to get back to what we had 6 years ago before the pandemic. So seriously, level set your shit. Level set your expectations when it comes to looking at comic book box office. International is going to be a lot less predictable than it has been, okay? This is part of it in that regard, right? Because it's not just U.S. numbers, right? It's not just domestic numbers changing. It's also international numbers changing. China has decided over the last, since the pandemic, they have decided, hey, you know what? Screw these American movies. We're going to focus more on our own cinema, right? And their highest grossing movies have come out of their own country in that regard. And they haven't just rejected Fantastic Four and Superman. And they didn't fully reject it. The turnout has not been high for either of those. You want to talk about movies that they have outright rejected? How about these? Black Widow, Spider-Man No Way Home, The Eternals, Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings. Yeah, that's right. Shang-Chi did not get a China release. Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, and Thor Love and Thunder, right? That's nearly all of Phase 4 that wasn't released in China. Not until Black Panther Wakanda Forever and Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania did Marvel get a movie released in China, right? Marvel, not DC, Marvel, okay? There was a drought. China said, screw Marvel. We're not doing any of your movies until 2022, late 2022, right? Like all those movies. Remember, the 4 movies that came out in 2021, none of them, not a single one of them released in China. And then from the beginning of 2022, Doctor Strange, which made over 900 million worldwide, Thor: Love and Thunder, which made over 600 million worldwide, those didn't release in China. So this idea that it's all about the DC brand being poisoned, or about this and that, or Fox screwing up the Fantastic Four, it's bullshit. The landscape has changed internationally. The landscape has changed domestically. It is time to start looking at these box office numbers and seeing them for what they are. What we saw with Black Panther when it had a 51-49 split domestic over international as far as its box office when it made over $1 billion. What we saw with Wonder Woman in terms of its 50-50, close to 50-50 split domestic and international, get used to that. That's what we're going to be seeing now. Right now, the split for Superman. Right now, Superman, according to Box Office Mojo, is sitting at 506.5 million worldwide. That's 292.4 million domestic, 214.1 million international. That's a 57-42 split. We're going to go ahead and round up to 58. 58 because it's 57.7 and 42.3. So it's a 58 to 42% split domestic over international, right? By the same token, Fantastic Four First Steps through Monday has made 128 million domestic, 99 million international. That is a 56.4 to 43.6% split. So we'll go ahead and say 57 to 43 split, right? Domestic over international. A grand worldwide total so far in its first 4 days of release of 227.1 million. It's doing Superman numbers, right? It's doing the Superman trajectory as far as I'm concerned. Although they did say that the Monday drop, 61.5%, was more than Superman's Monday drop. So maybe it'll be a little bit behind Superman, but it'll be close enough. This is what we have to expect, guys. This is where we need to level set our box office expectations. This is what you need to be looking at. And I'm not giving you any bullshit from ChatGPT. I'm not giving you any speculation. I'm not giving you any opinion. I'm showing you what the numbers say. I'm telling you what the experts are saying. I'm giving you data, and I'm giving you insight from the professionals that research this data. They're telling you, they're telling us, we ain't getting back to billion-dollar films like on the regular for comic book movies till 2030 at the earliest. At the earliest, okay? You can throw Deadpool and Wolverine and No Way Home at me all you like. It doesn't matter. If Doomsday makes $2 billion next year, that doesn't matter. Everything else that isn't a massive nostalgic team-up is going to make around what these movies are making now, right? What Superman and Fantastic Four First Steps are doing right now, this is the blueprint going forward. This is what you're going to have to look forward to. And granted, with respect to DC Studios, they want to see an upward trajectory. They want to see Supergirl get a boost from the reboot of Superman and the success of Superman. They want to see that happen, and they certainly want to see Clayface, succeed as a horror film, right? And it's going to be different because it's going to be a horror movie. It's probably going to be rated R. I don't know. They might try to keep it PG-13. I don't know. I'm not sure. It's a Mike Flanagan script, so that tells me it's probably going to be rated R, more than likely. It's going to be for an adult audience. But that's part of the variety that DC Studios is offering as far as what James Gunn has told us is going to be the case in that regard. And surely, yeah, they want to see an upward trajectory, and that's going to be a situation where, they're going to treat it case by case, but, they've got it. They've got Zaslav sold on their plan at DC Studios, right? So they want to see that go. And then you've got Feige talking about his 7-year plan, which at some point is going to include a reset of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And he talked about us having another Tony Stark and another Captain America, right? Like not reboot, but reset. And I'm very curious to see how those waters are going to get navigated by Marvel Studios. So we are in a very pivotal juncture for the comic book movie genre right now, for the superhero movie genre, with respect to both Marvel Studios and DC Studios. And part of this is the changing expectations for box office. I submit to you that what we are seeing right now with Superman and Fantastic Four First Steps is the blueprint going forward. This is what we need to prepare for. This is what we need to get used to. Domestic over international. Stop trusting China. Stop trusting the UK. And I don't mean, stop trusting the countries. I mean, stop trusting the numbers. Stop trusting the money that comes out of that. They're not here to help propel these, right? And don't give me Jurassic World. Don't tell me anything about Jurassic World, because that's not a superhero movie. That's a dinosaur movie. The overlap from that audience over onto superhero movies isn't quite as big as you think. And remember, as far as like critical acclaim and as far as what people have told me that have seen the film, that's not as good as either Superman or Fantastic Four First Steps. And the Hell Site numbers show that as well, right? Like right now, Jurassic World Rebirth, as it motors past $700 million worldwide. Right now it's at 721.4, right? Right now, It is the lowest rated from the critics and from the audience as far as that Hell Site's tomato meter score and the popcorn meter score, right? It's rated, and I mean significantly lower than both Superman and Fantastic Four, and yet it's making the most money. And it only came out a week earlier, but it did have the benefit of 4th of July. But here's also some perspective with respect to Jurassic World Rebirth for anybody that wants to argue that as a point of order. Those movies, Jurassic World, have typically seen anywhere between a 31 to 30 to 70% split of 30% domestic, 70% international as far as their billion-dollar grosses. And yes, this is a franchise that consistently makes at least $1 billion with every movie. Dominion made it, Fallen Kingdom made it, Jurassic World made it, right? This is just what they do, okay? Dinosaurs. People love dinosaurs. It's worldwide. I mean, the movie opened at 92 million. It opened at 92 million domestically, and yet it's probably gonna get to $1 billion, right? Because they're gonna keep it in theaters, and they're gonna keep, and it's gonna end up like Lilo and Stitch. Lilo and Stitch came out late May and hit $1 billion last week, right? Because they left it in theaters for that long. Universal's probably going to do the same thing with Jurassic World. It's going to get to $1 billion like a month from now, right? Or however long it takes, okay? But here's the thing. Like I said, the split usually has been domestic 30%, international 70%. Right now, it's got 303.3 million domestic, 418.1 million international. That's 42 to 58, right? So even they're feeling a bit of a pinch in terms of the international money and the domestic money. And I should also point this out, because I've seen some trolls and some morons and even some bigger accounts that have followings talk about how it's crazy that a Superman movie is going to barely outdo a Jurassic World film. And I just want to point out that Jurassic World needed the better part of a month, Jurassic World Rebirth that is, needed the better part of a month to get to 300 million domestic, whereas Superman's going to get there in 3 weeks. Right, by the end of this upcoming weekend, in fact, within the next couple of days, right, might even be up to, like depending on what happens, on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, right, depending on how that goes, because you're still making $3 million on a Monday, right? You're still making $3 million on a Monday in the summer. Let's see how the week goes, right? But certainly after next weekend, it'll be over $300 million, and it will have gotten there significantly faster than Jurassic World Rebirth did, right? That's just that's just food for thought with respect to the monies. And this is what we got to think about here. These are the rational conversations that we can have about box office, not the pissing contest, not about which movie is better, not about who's dealing with fake narratives that are set upon by fans, right? No, let's look at the data. Let's look at what we're being told by the actual analysts that are looking at box office, what they're telling us in terms of box office recovery from 2020. Let's remember that 2020 happened and has affected all of this. Let's remember that the strikes happened and has affected all of this. And then after all of that, we can talk about inflation. We can talk about the lack of disposable income from families and how much they got to spend to get to the theater, how they're, the glut of superhero movies has forced them to choose less every year. And this year, it really, among the 4 superhero movies, it seems abundantly clear, everybody, that between the 4 movies that were released, 4 superhero movies, the general audience decided we're going to go see Superman and Fantastic Four. Clearly, those were the 2 chosen. We can say that now, even after just one opening weekend for Fantastic Four, because more than likely, Fantastic Four is going to outgross both Captain America Brave New World and Thunderbolts, just like Superman already has in 3 weeks, right? Little under 3 weeks in that regard, right? 3 weekends for sure, okay? So that's what they decided, right? You had 4 comic book movies. General audience said, we're watching 2. We're going to wait till July. So February they didn't go, and May they didn't go. They waited until July, and then they said, hey, let's drop all of our money in the summer on Big Blue and the Big Blue Boy Scout, with the red cape in Metropolis, and let's go drop the rest of it a couple of weeks later on the First Family, Marvel's First Family, right? That's what they said. That's what these numbers are bearing out here, right? And again, this isn't opinion. This isn't ChatGPT. This isn't speculation. This is real. This is data. This is what we're monitoring from the box office. This is what we're monitoring from what the experts are telling us about what is happening and about what the landscape is. So argue with it as much as you like. Deny it as much as you like. But facts are mean, and they don't care about your feelings more than anything else in that regard. So you can feel however you want about Man of Steel. You can feel however you want about the superhero box office. You can make all the excuses you want. But the truth is the proof is in the pudding, right? The truth is there, and the truth shall set you free. And I am more than willing to provide plenty of it. Okay, I had my theories on what was going to happen. I figured that of the Marvel movies, the one that was going to perform the best this year would be Fantastic Four. And so far, I'm on my way to being proven right with respect to that. I wasn't sure what Superman was going to do, but it looks like Fantastic Four and Superman are going to finish around the same numbers. At least if Fantastic Four continues the way that it has started. And, we'll see how long Superman keeps going. I was reassured, because I've been worried about whether or not they would decide to, cut Superman off at a 45-day window and then throw it on HBO Max because they're so concerned about streaming. But on Threads, somebody asked James Gunn, when he talked about Peacemaker Season 2 premiering on August 21st, somebody asked James Gunn if Superman would be on HBO Max before then, and his exact words were, not even close. That is a good sign, because that tells me that they're not holding strict to that 45-day release window. That tells me that the positive word of mouth, the A- cinema score, and what they've done so far in the first 2.5 to 3 weeks of the box office, that tells me they're like, okay, we're leaving this in theaters. We're leaving this in for the long haul. They're going to do like Lilo and Stitch just did. They're going to do like Jurassic World Rebirth is likely going to do, like I said earlier, and they're going to leave Superman out there to make as much money as it possibly can. So we'll see where it goes. We'll see what that ceiling is. Now, look, I'm not saying that the international money will suddenly sprout up and rise up. In fact, I don't think it's going to do that, right? I don't see that happening in that regard, right? I mean, it's not that they've made no money internationally as far as Superman or Fantastic Four is concerned. It's just not enough to reach $1 billion. But what I said before was that for Superman, my best case scenario for Superman was Wonder Woman, right? Remember what Wonder Woman did, right? Wonder Woman was the film, I think I brought this up before and I'll bring it up again. It opened domestically in pre-pandemic, of course, I acknowledge pre-pandemic. It opened domestically at 103.2 million, right? But it had incredible legs, right? As far as, how long they kept it in theaters. Remember, it outlasted First Night, Transformers First Night. It outlasted Spider-Man Homecoming, right? And at the end of the day, 823.9 million worldwide. Now look, if Superman gets anywhere near $800 million, and I am not saying is going to, I am not predicting that whatsoever. But if it gets anywhere near $800 million, that is a resounding success in a post-2020 world for DC Studios. Because if this film, Wonder Woman, in 2017 made that, and that was considered a massive success, then for Wonder Woman, her first time out on the big screen, then Superman's reboot in post-2020 era Hollywood doing that would be something else. And that was, again, this is a 51-49 split with respect to nearly a 50-50 split, because it was 50.1% domestic, 49.9% international, did 412.8 million domestically, 411.1 million internationally, right? And I don't know that Superman is going to reach 411 international. They're talking, I saw an account today say that Superman, the way that it was trending for a domestic finish of somewhere between 370 to 405 million. That would be unbelievable, right? Not unbelievable, but just, that would be such an incredible mark for that film in the post-2020 Hollywood era, right? So I don't know what that, like, if they did that, right? Like let's say, and this isn't going to be the case, because Superman is still going to make international money. It's not going to, we don't know, it's not going to make that much, right? It's only made 214.1 million internationally in its first 18 days of release, but 292.4 million domestically, right? If it reaches 400 million plus domestically, then you're talking about already an over $600 million film, right? You're talking about that already. And that, to me, I mean, that, I said the closer that this thing gets to Man of Steel's worldwide gross, the better. And one could argue, and this is where the trolls and the rage bots and all of the Pocket Universe chimps are really going to get pissy with me, right? One could absolutely argue that a Superman film that gets even close to pre-2020 Man of Steel numbers in a post-2020 era, one could argue that's more impressive. One could absolutely argue that that's more impressive because it's a changed landscape, right? And again, this is why the adjusted for inflation arguments are bullshit, because you can't just change the value of a dollar and not take everything else into account. Because for one, you're changing the value of the dollar only on the returns and not on the actual budget spent, because if that's the case, all the people that want to say Superman the movie would have made $1.4 billion in today's economy, yes, but it would have cost $271 million to make, which would be more than the budget for both Superman 2025 and Man of Steel in that regard, right? But you're not thinking about that. And you're only talking about the value of a dollar. You're not talking about Hollywood as an economic industry. You're not talking about the changes. You're not talking about the challenges, right? You're telling me that if Superman the movie released in a post-2020, post-COVID, post-strike era, that it would make $1.4 billion? You're out of your mind. There's absolutely no way, right? That's why that argument is bullshit, and it's just pissing contest material. But if we look at the landscape today and we say this Superman movie made close to Man of Steel's money, and Man of Steel did that successfully in 2013, this movie in post-2020 era, if it does this, holy shit, hell yes. That's what I'm talking about in terms of reframing our expectations on box office. You may not want to do that, right? You may think that that's copping out. It's not. It's understanding the reality of the economic situation that we all live in that regard, and how it has changed Hollywood, and how we're not going to fully recover from it, according to the experts, for another 4 to 5 years. So this is our baseline, guys. What Superman and Fantastic Four are doing right now. This is the baseline for what success is going to be for these comic book films, more than likely going forward, at least for the next 4 to 5 years, and then we'll go from there. And then we'll see what DC Studios does with the ascension of their franchise, and we'll see what Marvel Studios does with the reset of their franchise. So just wanted to put all that into perspective and have a real analytical talk, if you will, because you know I love bringing facts, you know I love bringing numbers, you know I love backing up what I have to say and my perspectives with actual data and not just opinions. I may have subjective opinions, but if I see something happening here, and if the experts are saying, hey, this is where we're at, then I want to call that to you guys' attention so that you can stop dealing with all these lazy-ass trolls that just want to waste your time and talk about how it adjusted for inflation and this and that, and the DC brand being damaged, and Zack Snyder being the Antichrist and all that, whatever, all that nonsense. Now you got all this to throw back at them. And, you know, if you want links for all this stuff, I mean, you can find it, right? You can Google it just as easily as I did, right? You don't have to use ChatGPT. I keep bringing up ChatGPT because the other night, just yesterday, actually, somebody tried to argue box office numbers with me over these movies, and they came up with some made-up number for Fantastic Four, said it was 336 million worldwide, and I'm like, where did you pulled that number out of your ass? And the guy goes, it was ChatGPT. I guess I was wrong. I just pulled it from ChatGPT. Why are you pulling box office numbers from ChatGPT? You can't Google? You don't have the ability to ask Google? You can't search a site like Box Office Mojo or the numbers when it works, right? You can't follow actual sources. You can't even go to some of the trades that were already reporting what Fantastic Four First Steps opening weekend global box office was? Really? You're going to rely on AI? You got to rely on ChatGPT. It's so lazy. Tired of laziness. None of us have time for laziness, especially when it comes to this shit. If we're going to have discussions, if we're going to have rational discussions about this stuff, then we need to come to the table prepared. We need to come to the table with knowledge, or at least with the ability to learn what we don't already know, right? Like that's few and far between in the world that we live in today, and we got to get back to that shit. I'm not trying to be preachy, but you know what I mean with respect to that. So yeah, wanted to throw that out there. Wanted to talk about that and really just talk about how we need to reset our box office expectations based on what we're seeing with both Superman and Fantastic Four First Steps. And this is apart from the fact that we've got a situation where the Marvel Cinematic Universe and the DC Cinematic Universe, the DC Universe, if you will, are shaking hands, right? Like they are in lockstep, and we got people out there that are ready to ditch the fanboy wars and just talk about, hey, Marvel and DC are awesome. We enjoy them both. We're at that point, people. We got people out there praising Superman and Fantastic Four as though like we got two fantastic superhero films in the month of July 2025, and it's made this topsy-turvy, otherwise shitty year for a lot of people just a little bit better for some of us in that regard. And we can thank Kevin Feige and Marvel Studios, and certainly James Gunn and DC Studios for that as well. So yeah, that's another topic for another day. I mean, we'll certainly be talking about that and how that changes the fandom and whatnot, but I definitely want to talk about that box office stuff and just dive into the numbers just a little bit here for some much needed perspective on the box office conversation. And you know what? I think that'll do it for this particular episode of the Flightcast. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for supporting the Flightcast. If you have any thoughts with respect to anything that I brought up tonight with respect to San Diego Comic-Con, if there's some stuff that was announced at San Diego Comic-Con that you got excited for, that I missed, that you want to talk about, that you want to share with us in the feedback session over on Flight Chat. If you have any thoughts of what I talked about with respect to Star Trek, right? And hopefully Amr and Alex Sosova didn't hear too much of what I said. I don't think a whole lot of what I said with respect to the future of Star Trek gave them a ton of spoilers for their watch updates where they're at respectively in TNG, right? But If you have any thoughts with respect to Star Trek, if you have any thoughts with respect to the box office conversation and resetting our expectations for box office, like I've talked about, you know where to find me on Threads and on Instagram at the Flightcast. There's also, you can comment on the posting for this episode on the Flightcast YouTube page. There's also the Flightcast Facebook page. I'm on BLUESKY at Flightcast, and of course I can be reached by email at ray@theflightcast.com. All right, take care. Stay safe out there. Have a great rest of the week, and I will see you all next time. Take it easy.